Coming up on Tech News Weekly, it's me, Jason Howell, and Mikah Sargent. We talk about how Visa won't be buying Plaid after all. Also, will Trump end up snapping back at social media now, or is it just too late for anything like that? The Consumer Electronics Show 2021 is a wrap. Was it as effective as in its digital form as it was last year in person? Apple's major racial equity and justice initiative is fully detailed, lots of information there. And Samsung unveiled its Galaxy S21 series earlier this morning. We've got all that and a whole lot more next on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 166, recorded Thursday, January 14th, 2021. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. Now you can look forward to a successful new year where you can get a new career in IT with the best IT education around. Visit itpro.tv/TNW for an additional 30% off all consumer subscriptions for the lifetime of your active subscription. And use code TNW30 at checkout.
Hello, and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm the other one, Jason Howell. How's it going?
How's it going? I'm sure you hear that all the time. Oh,
What's up?
I'm sorry. How you doing? Hey there. It's dry and dreary and strange here in California. Totally. But we're keep on keeping on, right?
That's right. Let's keep on keeping on right now.
Exactly. Speaking of keeping, there was a new bit of news that came out regarding Visa. Visa was going to be acquiring a company called Plaid. And this was, I remember this news kind of popping up originally about Visa going after Plaid. And I remember Plaid very vaguely, but not a whole lot about it. And so I thought it would be good to talk to someone who not only covers acquisitions and startups and all that kind of stuff, but that can explain sort of what's going on here and what the reasons are behind Visa not acquiring Plaid. So who else but TechCrunch's own Alex Wilhelm to join us today on Tech News Weekly. Welcome back to the show, Alex.
Thank you for having me. An absolute pleasure. And I just want to say, having done a lot of podcasting myself, I fully respect how hard it is to do a witty intro every time. And sometimes you just end up bantering back and forth about keeping on, and it's perfect. And so I just wanted to send a big hug over the waves here, because it's being charismatic on demand, or on command, I should say, it's not simple. It's difficult.
It is. Thank you for understanding.
We appreciate it. So yeah, let's break right into this. First and foremost, I think a lot of people know what Visa is, but can we talk about Plaid? What is Plaid, and why does it make sense for Visa to have wanted to acquire this company in the first place?
Yeah, so I think one thing we've all done a lot in the last couple of years is begun to use more fintech mobile applications. And, if you go back 10 and 15 years, people were saying, don't do your banking online. It might be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. Now people expect to use Venmo on their phones. They expect to use maybe Chime on their desktop. And they just really have a lot of expectations to have access to their money in different places. And that's where Plaid comes in. Essentially, Plaid sits between you and I, kind of the end users, and financial services that we want to use. It helps link our bank accounts to those services. And so it forms kind of like a bit of the plumbing in the broader fintech boom. And when you think about that, you can kind of start to see why Visa would want to own it. Think about it this way. Visa is a payment processor, a credit company. It is accepted around the world and has really done a great job, I think, owning to some degree the old way of doing commerce. Now there's a new wave coming up, and people are using more virtual cards. They're using different types of cryptocurrencies. The world's getting more complex and more diverse. And so as the app world begins to support that, Plaid becomes more and more important. And so Visa wanted to make sure that they were going to be at the forefront of this next generation of financial technology. And so it tried to buy it. And that went medium well until it didn't.
Medium well. I don't know if that's how I like my burgers, but I guess I'm curious then, because to me this on the outside kind of makes sense. I get it. You as a company can either try to sort of reach in and become part of this this new way of doing things and build this up yourself, or an easier way might be to acquire a company that already has their cables in the right pies, as it were. And so what was the reason that Visa and Plaid ended up not going forward? What was the problem here?
I think there were a couple of problems. One was the price didn't make a lot of sense 1 year down the road. So this deal was announced really almost a year ago today, early mid-January 2020. And at that point, $5.3 billion for what Plaid was seemed pretty good. If you were a Plaid investor, it's a great exit. It's a big multiple on previous valuations. You're pretty happy. Then during 2020, COVID happens. People turn increasingly to fintech. There's a savings and investing boom with Robinhood blowing up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you end up with at the start of 2021 is probably, the general presumption is, a much larger Plaid that's worth a lot more money. And suddenly that old valuation from January 2020 looks a little bit stale. The other thing that happened was the Department of Justice sued to block it. I think that was in November. So we've seen antitrust in America, after years of dormancy, discover that it does actually have teeth. And so between the length of the required time to get the deal done, the price getting a little bit stale, and the DOJ stepping in, that was pretty much enough to put a nail in this coffin. Yeah.
So this is what's fascinating to me, because this did end up causing them to stop, kind of like what you talked about there. There were teeth there that we did not necessarily expect. But it does make me wonder, because there have been, a number of deals with scrutiny. Was it Sprint and T-Mobile joining together as one example? And that went through. Apple acquires companies all the time. Google acquires companies all the time.
Google and Fitbit today.
Yeah, Google and Fitbit. Yeah, that's a perfect example, Jason. So what makes this, do you feel, I guess, was it more about the concern there that the government had, or really was it more about the valuation and the staleness of that valuation?
I mean, it's a little bit hard to pull apart from this perspective, because we just weren't in the rooms. So I would say I agree those two reasons don't deserve equal weight. But your example about other bits of M&A that have gone through that were either uncontested or allowed to eventually happen, the examples sound good, but maybe they shouldn't have been allowed to happen. And so maybe what we're seeing here is a reversion to the correct line of thinking. This, of course, depends on your governing philosophy and how you think about capitalism and rules and so forth. But it's very possible that the Plaid block could be correct and the Sprint T-Mobile deal letting it happen was incorrect. That's, if you ask my personal view, that's what I think. What we're trying to avoid is so much concentration in different parts of the economy that single companies gain either monopoly power or something close to it. And giving Visa Plaid, given how important it has become, by my understanding, to the fintech world, might create a company that's a bit too strong. Now, for startup investors who want to sell their startups to large companies with lots of cash, that can be a little bit dispiriting in some cases. But I don't think in this case it was the wrong regulatory choice, again, from my own personal political standpoint.
So then, what is next for Plaid? Obviously you've got the investors who are really probably crossing their fingers waiting for that big payday, and that's not going to happen. Is Plaid more likely to look for another merger opportunity? Are they going to go public on their own? If you had to guess anyways, so looking at it now, what do you think?
So it's the latter. I think they're going to go public. The question is when and under what conditions. Back in 2020, when the Plaid deal was announced, it hit like a meteor strike. I mean, that's why Mikah remembers it, because it was such a big transaction that people really stood up and kind of took notice. At the time, people were saying things quietly like, Plaid's a really good business. It's not just selling out because it has to. It's selling out because it's great. That's why the dollar amount was so high at the time. So my hunch is that if Plaid was a good business at the start of 2020, it's probably an even better business now. A year of growth, a year of investment, a year of hiring. I spoke to the company and their CEO about how many people they'd hired, and it was a couple hundred during 2020, if I recall correctly. So how far away an IPO is or a direct listing, I don't know. But certainly Plaid has access to lots of capital from the private markets to fuel itself. It could even put together a secondary offering, allowing some employees to sell some of their shares if they'd like to, because a lot of employees probably had planned on buying a house after the Visa deal closed, for example. That's not going to happen, as you said, Jason. So I think there's a great path forward for the company. I just lack enough numbers about its performance to be prescriptive. And so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but at least what I've been told makes me think that it's going to be in pretty good shape to eventually go public itself.
So let's do a little, I know, you hesitate to do too much crystal balling, but I am curious, if you had to look on down the line into the future, does Visa attempt to go after maybe another smaller company? Does it come back with more, like a bigger offer for trying to pick up this company? Or does Visa try to build out its own infrastructure like Plaid, but just does it itself? What does the future look like for Visa? Again, do you think? And are we going to continue to see just these companies that already have their foot in the door, that already are doing the thing like Plaid? Just they're the ones now, and Visa just has to play nice with Plaid.
Well, it's a couple of really good questions. So let me do my best. When it comes to Visa, keep in mind that Visa and MasterCard, if I recall correctly, are both investors in Plaid. So they've already made bets on this company's success, and that happened before Visa tried to buy it. So they were already hedging their future by buying a chunk of Plaid shares to ensure that they had exposure to that company's success, or at least maybe information about how it was doing. So one possibility is we could see Visa double down on that, put more money into Plaid in future rounds, maybe even lead the next round. That would not cause regulatory issues. It would still be a minority shareholder. So if Visa really wanted to put more capital into it, there's probably a way forward. And they have a lot of relationships now, which if they didn't go south, should be just fine to use in that situation. I don't see Visa trying to build out what Plaid does. I don't think it has the internal muscles for it. Startups are tough. It's very hard to do startups inside of big companies. And Zach, the CEO of Plaid, told me that they were expecting to have a lot of flexibility and latitude inside of Visa to make their own kind of product choices. So I don't see Visa going after them with anything other than a checkbook. And when it comes to playing nice, one thing that we've seen a lot of in the last 12 to 18 months, at least from where I'm sitting, and I'm just one person in the market, so certainly not saying that I'm omniscient, but a lot more API first fintech companies. And what that means is a lot more people in the fintech space are building products that are designed to plug into other services. And so I think that is the future that you were talking about, Mikah. I'm not exactly sure if it's going to be Plaid versus everybody or more of a split pot, but I think we have kind of seen where the direction of this product line is going, fintech broadly, and Plaid certainly fits, I think, at the forefront of that.
So my last question for you is this. Because it seems less, again, like it was just the fact that the government stepped in here and, about multiple reasons. But given that, Visa ended up stepping back from this, Plaid ended up stepping back from this, it, in the beginning at least, had me going, okay, this is interesting. Is this new in terms of regulatory action? And are we going to see now more attention paid to these types of deals? Or is it... Can we tie this to some sort of trend, or do we just think that this one just happened to work? This one just happened to go through?
Yeah. I mean, forget a crystal ball. What we need is a Palantir, because what's coming up is a change in administration. And so we're sitting here right now in the very last couple of days of the Trump administration, looking at this all through the lens of the administration that's been in power for 4 years here in America. Once you flip the switch and you fill it full of Biden's people, and Kamala's people, I mean, it could be different. The posture could change, the attitude could change. speaking freely because, I like this show and I like you guys. I don't particularly see the Biden administration being overly antagonistic towards business. I think they're relatively moderate in that regard. So perhaps we could actually see a lessening of regulatory oversight for mergers. Maybe not. It's too soon to say. Ask me that again in 2 weeks. I think we'll have a much better idea of where we sit. But I think for investors, the idea that these cash-rich incumbents, these major tech companies that might be the acquirer of startups, did just lose some steam. I mean, this deal was a high watermark for fintech startups. And now, it goes to show that some pathways might be closed in the future. That could impact startup valuations. It could impact startup investment rates, et cetera, et cetera. This just happened, so I don't have any data to show you a decline or an increase in this or that to kind of make the point. But that's the conversation, at least today in Silicon Valley.
Makes sense. Well, Alex Wilhelm, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You are always a great guest on the show, and we appreciate you being here. If folks want to follow you online and check out all the great work you're doing, where's the best place to go to do that?
Oh, I'm over on Twitter more than I should be. Twitter.com/Alex. And Mikah, you need to send me a DM with where you bought your jacket because I like it.
I will definitely do that, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you, Alex. Take care of yourself. We appreciate you. All right, up next, Trump, as you already probably know, is shut out from social media. How does he plan to strike back? And is there a road for that happening at this point, so close to the end of his presidency? We're going to talk about that. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. It's a new year. Totally. I mean, you've got so many opportunities in front of you, and IT Pro TV is one of them. Seriously, IT Pro TV has exactly what you need to get started on the right foot. If in the realm of IT education, you can get professional, super engaging and entertaining IT training from the comfort and safety of your own home. You can learn all about IT in the process. January is getting started in IT month at IT Pro TV. It's a great time for you to start your new career in the IT industry, which is continually growing even during and especially during COVID. This month, you can catch 2 webinars for budding IT pros. There's a free training weekend with 5 courses available at no charge and tons of videos on their YouTube channel about starting a new career. So lots of fuel to get you started with plans for business that your IT team will actually use, or of course a personal plan that will help you accelerate your IT career individually. IT Pro TV is your one-stop shop. So you can get training in Microsoft, Cisco, Apple, Linux, and so much more. And you'll be able to earn IT certifications while improving your IT skills. They have over 5,800 hours of IT training. That's insane. And are also the only official video training partner for CompTIA. So if you're worried about staying on track, you don't need to worry about that. You can get one of their learning coaches along with all of their wonderful job resources. And that's to help guide you on your career path. So you've got a helping hand leading you the right way. You'll always be supported with IT Pro TV's amazing team. You can get more insight about IT by checking out their podcast Technado with Dawn Pizzette. And Dawn brings on industry guests, IT news recaps that take you kind of on a deeper dive into the IT realm. So now you can look forward to a successful new year where you can get a new career in IT with the best IT education around. Go to itpro.tv/TNW and make sure and use the code TNW30 while you're there. You'll receive 30% off all consumer subscriptions for the lifetime of your active subscription. That's itpro.tv/TNW. Use that code TNW30. You'll get an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. That's IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. It really is enjoyable, and it's awesome what they're doing, and we thank IT Pro TV for their continued support of the TWiT Network and Tech News Weekly.
Thank you so much, IT Pro TV. All right, so let's all take a breath and let us begin. There have been multiple social networks, online tech companies, and multiple sort of internet infrastructure companies that have have responded to the recent insurrection at the Capitol and President Donald Trump's involvement in that incident. And with that, I think one of the biggest places that we've seen is in the realm of social media, and companies saying, look, you have brought about violence, you've brought about disorder, and because of that, we can't give you a platform to continue those things. And that has led to President Donald Trump sort of threatening to clap back, as it were. So I am excited to be joined today by Protocol's Emily Birnbaum to talk about all of this and to kind of give us an update on where things stand and where things could go. Welcome back to the show, Emily.
Me, I always love being here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you back. Let's begin with a bit of an update, because we did have we had a little bit of a conversation last week about where things stood at the time. And at that point, I think there were some companies that had said, Donald Trump's accounts are suspended for a week, 2 weeks. And since that point, many companies have completely banned the president's accounts. So as far as you know, could you give us kind of a not necessarily a list, but just some of the big names in social media that have either banned or suspended the president?
Yeah, I mean, obviously on Twitter, he is permanently banned. And he is so banned on Twitter that if they get any sense that he's trying to evade the ban, that he's trying to post from someone else's account, that account immediately will be taken down and permanently suspended as well. So Trump's Twitter presidency is officially over in many different ways. And on Facebook, he's indefinitely banned, basically. So he's definitely banned through inauguration, which is next week. And Sheryl Sandberg spoke this week, and she said it's indefinite. We don't really know when this suspension is going to be over. And then on YouTube, they have a really different approach to content moderation. Donald Trump also uses YouTube very differently than how he uses other social media platforms. So on YouTube, basically all you need to know is that he is suspended for the next week. And then it's kind of contingent on what he posts, whether he continues to violate their guidelines, what happens next. And he's also banned on a variety of platforms that he probably didn't even use. So for instance, Pinterest came out and said that they wouldn't allow Donald Trump to be on the platform. Like, we know that not only is Trump banned from a bunch of platforms, but also a lot of his supporters. So there's been sort of an effort to take down pro-Trump forums on Discord, on Reddit. Basically, this is the most action we've seen from tech throughout Trump's presidency to just completely deplatform him and many of his supporters.
Yeah, so that's kind of been one of the things that I think most of us have been paying attention to is not just Donald Trump himself, but also, if not directly his supporters, some of the groups that have been involved in these plans that led to the insurrection at the Capitol. So let's then talk about. One of the things that a narrative that I've seen is sort of a disappointment in the way that tech companies have handled things up to this point, and almost, the belief that this finally went through and this finally happened because the president had kind of lost his teeth, so to speak. At this point, with the election certified and, the inauguration upcoming, that they could finally make an action and count on there not being governmental blowback. But as you have noted in an article that you've written, Donald Trump is still threatening that he's got some plans in the works. So let's talk first about what those alleged plans are, and then we can kind of talk about whether they would be effective.
Yeah. So if you talk to anybody who was close to Donald Trump over the weekend after Twitter originally suspended him, and Facebook did as well, they would say, okay, in this final week of his presidency, he's going to do one last thing against tech. You know, like he still has the power of the White House. He still has access to so many levers he could pull. And he's just going to do one last thing to really take on big tech, which is one of his favorite number one boogeymen besides the, fake news media. And ultimately, it's Thursday now. There was some talk and some chatter that there was going to be a press conference earlier in the week where he was going to make some announcements. That ultimately didn't happen. On Wednesday, he was impeached for a second time by the House. Now, Mitch McConnell, one of his closest allies throughout his presidency in the Senate, is saying, well, maybe I'll wait and see. He's left open the possibility that he could also support the president's conviction in the Senate. So he's facing so many overlapping political crises. He's being accused, obviously, of inciting an insurrection with his words, leading to the deaths of 5 people. So yesterday, the president put out a video in which he basically said, I don't support violence. Anybody who is doing violence is not really a true supporter of mine. And in that video, you would expect that would be his moment to talk about the censorship of the big tech platforms and, how he's been deplatformed from every major social media account. Basically all he said was, we are facing an unprecedented moment in assaults, the assault of freedom of speech. But he didn't say anything. He didn't name any of the tech platforms individually. He didn't, announce any new attack against tech. And really, the clock has basically run out. So there were levers at his disposal that he could have pulled to take on the companies, executive orders. He could have used some really sweeping powers that technically he has access to, but he ultimately didn't. And I think that it's safe to say he probably won't within the next 5 days, but anything is possible.
Yes, exactly. Anything is possible. So given that he kind of didn't talk about that, it does, I think it leaves one wondering what is the possibility? Where does this group of people exist online? Where do they go? And in kind of paying attention to this, Emily, I'm curious if you've seen sort of any trends on where the president is communicating and where his supporters and followers are gathering. And I know Parler was one of those places, but Parler has run into some issues there. Is there a path forward online for the president and for his supporters?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's really interesting to me is, there was a lot of talk about okay, maybe Donald Trump is going to try to create his own social media network where he and his supporters can all be. But as we saw with the deplatforming of Parler this week, that would be really difficult for him to do. To have a totally unmoderated social media platform is something that is just not going to fly with, the people who keep the internet running. So that's AWS and other internet infrastructure companies. So basically, in order to launch your own social media platform, you have to own every level of the stack. And it's so burdensome and costly, it's hard to imagine how it could work. But I was speaking to someone the other day who, a Republican who's actually sympathetic towards the president. He said, people are kind of conflating these two things. The president he can find a way to communicate, and then also his supporters can find a place to gather. They don't have to happen in the same place. So for instance, this week when Trump wanted to speak, he put out a video through his official White House account. He put out a press statement that went out to all the reporters who cover the White House. He, originally gave his statement to Fox News, obviously his most sympathetic media outlet. And so there were many ways that he was able to communicate. But, when it comes to his supporters and some of, especially the fringier elements of the, pro-Trump movement, we're seeing an increase in the usage of Telegram, increase in the usage of other alternative platforms like MeWe. And I think all of these platforms are going to have to deal with the same questions that Parler did. Are you going to moderate this content? What are you going to do when people are, making calls for violence? And I don't think a lot of these platforms have a great plan forward. Like thinking about Gab, Gab has been a gathering place for right-wingers for a couple of years now, and they've dealt with so much, so-called deplatforming. So many companies who have said, I just don't want association with this at all. And that's just going to continue. So, it's not like deplatforming kills the extremism, and it's not like extremists will always find a place to gather. It just is getting harder and harder.
Yeah. So now let's look forward to the next presidency. And again, it's a little bit crystal ball-y, but it is, something that you pay attention to in your writing. Do we think that there are going to be calls for regulation from the government or more attention paid to this type of action by private companies, in the sense of the regulation of the way that these companies moderate their content? Are there mumblings and rumblings about that going forward, or is this kind of just, it's a very unique situation, and going forward, it's not going to be as much of a concern?
So I think that Democrats are beside themselves with anger about the role that social media companies played in, basically over the last 4 years in empowering and enabling the extremism within this movement. And really, QAnon was an online conspiracy theory that, in the most literal way, has reached into every element of real world life. And I think that Democrats, they now have control of the House, the Senate, the White House. I think inevitably they're going to try to do something to take on the platforms about the role they played in, helping to facilitate and looking the other way as their platforms were being used to foment this insurrection. It's inevitably going to happen. I mean, what that looks like in legislation, what that looks like in terms of the future of Section 230, I think it's really yet to be seen. But that Democratic anger at the platforms is really going to matter a lot. And I think it also, the other side of this conversation is Republicans, and Republicans who have said for a long time, big tech censors, right-wing voices, big tech is out to get us. But now Republicans are in this really difficult spot because they don't want to look like they are somehow okay with incitements to violence. They don't want to look like they loved Parler and everything that was on Parler. So I think that's also going to change the conversation for Republicans. Ultimately, I think that what happened with AWS is also going to really change the terms of the conversation. So the fact that AWS was able to totally deplatform an app basically in one foul swoop, I think that conservatives are probably going to hone in a little bit on that. What does it mean when our internet infrastructure gets involved that way?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a lot to continue to pay attention to. There's a lot that I know you'll be watching, and we do appreciate that. If folks want to follow you online, where do they go to do that?
So my Twitter handle is @Birnbaum_E.
Awesome. Well, Emily, thank you again for joining us today. And I know we'll be having you on again in the future. You're always a joy to have on the show. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
You too.
All righty, folks. Up next, we are going to talk about CES 2021 when Jason and I took our trip to Las Vegas. And no, wait, we didn't do that this year.
No, we did not make a trip to Vegas, Mikah. We don't have to. That's the beauty of the Consumer Electronics Show 2021. It's all digital. I don't know if that's the beauty or if that's the downside, but we're going to talk all about what the differences are between last year and this year's event and some of the cool stuff that was shown there. We've got Jason Heiner, editorial director at Cnet, joining us, and it's good to have you back, Jason.
Hey, great to see you, and always a pleasure to be here.
Right on. Well, thank you for taking some time to chat with us a little bit about CES. At this point, it's officially over, right? Like it's shorter than the normal event, which seems to last for like a week. It was just Monday through Wednesday for the most part, right?
Right. Well, technically, there's like some panels and that kind of thing happened today. But, I think for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much over. And then Samsung decided to plop their day, in the middle of it as well today. So that kind of officially made it over as everybody's attention shifted over to that.
Yeah, Samsung just had to get the last word. We're actually going to be talking about that a little bit later on in the show. Let's start with the event before we get into kind of some of the products and kind of cool trends that we're seeing this year. I definitely want to give you props. Cnet has done an awesome job, as Cnet always does with CES coverage. Obviously, this time though, very different, right? Usually, y'all are there. Scouring the show floor, you've got your stage, all that kind of stuff. Now it's a digital event, so it's all online and everything like that. How would you compare your experience as the executors of this event and the coverage of this event this year versus like many years before?
Yeah. So thanks for the kind words, of course. As a former colleague, you've experienced it firsthand. So
yes,
the interesting thing about this year's CES was it took a little time to get going because I think we all felt like, is this CES? Is this what it's going to be like? There was also no CES Unveiled. Which for those who know CES, that's the event that when that event happens, you kind of know like, okay, it's officially started. Like we're here, and time to get your running shoes on. There wasn't even a virtual version of CES Unveiled. And so we're all kind of like, oh, is it started? Are we? Yeah. Okay. So that was really interesting that it almost was a bit of a mental leap that we had to take to get there. But it worked out. This show really picked up momentum, I'd say, by day two. Day two opened with Mary Barra from GM giving a keynote, which really was one of the signature moments of the event. Because car companies have been at CES for 15 years, and they've done a lot of concept cars, they've done a lot of flashy kind of things, but GM packed their show with a lot of things. But really, the signature was their announcement that they essentially are reinventing the company to become an EV company. Now, the cynical side could say, well, they've been trying to do that for a long time, but the fact that they chose CES to do it was pretty cool, and it showed that this is a show where some things are going to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, talking about that a little bit, I've seen a couple of the products that they showed off, the air taxi, the self-driving car concept that is kind of hinges around what you're talking about. Is there a difference? I mean, obviously there is, but talk a little bit about the difference between being at an event and seeing these prototypes kind of in front of you, presented like in real life, versus kind of seeing yet another web page presentation or yet another video streaming presentation. Like, is the impact lost? These things look really cool, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the tactileness of seeing like a flying helicopter or like this Cadillac self-driving vehicle, you lose a little something for sure. Because what would typically happen is there's so much to see at CES. Some of it you never get to see in person. You only see it electronically, even if you're in Vegas, because there's so many things to see. So there is that, but there's also the sense of like, oh, I saw that. So before the end of the show, I need to get over to the GM booth and I want to see that flying, Cadillac air taxi. So you lose that for sure, because that's typically how it happens. You hear a few things in the first few days, and a few things sort of garner some of the most buzz, and then you're like, in those last couple of days, you sort of make a beeline for the booths where you want to go and actually take a look at a device or some kind of service or interesting thing. And so we lost that for sure. And I think you're going to see most likely next year, if the vaccines do their job this year and the world gets back to traveling, I think you will see more of a hybrid event. I don't know that it's going to go back to full strength like it was in the past several years, but I think you will see some real life version of the show combined with still some version that is virtual and that's going to connect sort of the dots on the two, because there's still going to be people who aren't ready to travel. And I think global travel is likely to still be impacted for a couple years to come from the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's probably not a 100% return by this time next year. But, I would imagine, I would agree, there's probably going to be some form of real kind of in-person event, which when all of this started taking place, that was the conversation du jour, right? Everybody was like, oh, well, maybe this is the future and nobody's going anywhere anymore. I kind of doubt that's going to happen. But you mentioned the pandemic. It's kind of the perfect lead into one of the obvious trends from CES, which are, kind of pandemic related technology and specifically COVID-19, products that like masks we saw, some air purifiers. Talk a little bit about what we saw there and kind of, I don't know, if anything stands out to you in that category.
Sure. Yeah. Pandemic tech was everywhere. In our preview of the show, we said that bandwagon is going to get crowded, and it certainly was. It started off the first day, the first press conference with LG. Their immediate pitch was a lot of pandemic tech. So they had a mask that they had announced last year, because really in Asia, people have been wearing masks proactively for several years, especially since SARS over there, which is related. It's a coronavirus related to COVID-19. And so they also last year announced a robot that can go through and uses UVC rays to sanitize things like offices and hotel rooms and manufacturing facilities when people aren't there. So it was pretty interesting that last year they had announced those things. Well, this year they came back with those. Then they came out with more air filters. They had a little HEPA filter that you can put in your bag and take with you. You can put it in the car. It's portable. You can put it at your desk if and when you sort of go back to work. So this show started with pandemic tech, and really throughout the whole thing, we saw tech that touched the pandemic all throughout, every day, all the time. And a few things, like one of the hottest, most interested products that showed the most interest on social media was Razer, this thing they called Project Hazel, which is a high-tech N95 mask. It has two filters on it. You can see they light up. They have these circle rings. And then it also has a clear part for your mouth where you can actually see somebody talking. So that's one of the things it's hard to communicate, especially people who are hard of hearing or that have other challenges. The thing is most masks make it sort of a challenge to communicate. So that was really popular. There were lots of other stuff too. There was one of the most at-risk populations during the pandemic have been senior citizens, right? Fewer people to go and visit them, to check in on them, have put them at greater risk. And so you have there was this product called the Nobi fall sensing ceiling lamp. So this lamp has some sensors in it so that if somebody falls, a senior citizen, it can send an alert to your caregiver to in case of an emergency, right? And so it's going to do some active monitoring of seniors specifically. So that was super cool. You also saw Alarm.com had a touchless doorbell where you don't have to touch it. You just go and stand in a mat where there's a square. Once it sees you're in the mat, and if you stay there for a certain amount of time, it realizes, okay, you need something, and it automatically, activates the doorbell. So there was all of those kinds of things. Then there were some things that are kind of tangentially pandemic, but still related to sort of the shutdown and the time that we're living in. So HP, one of the sleeper picks that we had was HP has a laptop called the Dragonfly Max that has a 5 megapixel video webcam in it. and as well as some nice microphones. Because one of the things is we've realized how bad these webcams are in our laptops when people are in in these Skype and Zoom calls all day long. So, one of the things that, hasn't taken much precedence or much focus. And so you are seeing a few companies doing that. You also have the Acer Chromebook Spin 514. That's a military spec Chromebook, which just means, and it also has Gorilla Glass on it, which means it's going to take a beating. So if you're giving this to a kid who's like 8, 9, 10 years old, that thing is gonna hold up under the strain. So with so many kids educating from home and likely to continue to for the months to come, things like that have some value and meaning. So you had that, and then of course all of the entertainment tech, TVs, bigger, cheaper, brighter, less expensive sound bars, since so much of the entertainment that we're consuming now is all from home, where people can't and aren't, getting out to other venues, theaters, and that kind of thing. So that, of course, is like the bread and butter of CES.
Yeah, it is. And one of the categories that really seeing it in person with your own eyes is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. So
you kind of have to take their word for it. But I mean, every year it's the bigger, better, sharper. No 3D this time, as far as I could see.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
and then some really interesting kind of innovative things happening in smartphones. We noticed both TCL, which TCL has actually put out a lot of prototypes over the last couple of years of very interesting kind of smartphone designs. TCL doing kind of the rollable device, but then also a scrollable device. Looks like an old school scroll. LG has its
Treasure
LG
map.
rollable. Yeah, just really interesting stuff.
Tablet.
Yeah, that's exactly. Although I don't understand when you scroll it out how you interact with it. If is it floppy? Like when you let go, does it drop? And like, can you actually use it? Anyways, do you think that this is like the where we were a couple of years ago with foldables, that rollables, based on what you've seen from CES so far in a couple of years, is going to be the next big thing?
This is one of those, foldables have not taken off and have had their challenges. And there's still a big question of what the use case is. The rollable, it's another shot at essentially the same idea. You can see it there. LG teased that, right? That they have this phone that essentially can roll up and make what is almost like a 16:9 screen more closer to like 4:3, right? So it's sort of like extending your screen when you're holding it in that landscape mode. And okay, there's people that are going to say, great, I'll take the extra real estate to look at a spreadsheet or scroll through a web page or a number of other tasks where that bigger screen makes a difference. But how much value do you get out of that? I don't know. It's a question. It's certainly a question. And I think that's the LG. Now, LG said they told Cnet, confirmed with Cnet this week, that's a real product that they plan to bring to market in the first half of this year. So it's not just a one of those CES concepts that we see and we never hear about again. And that TCL was a concept. But as you said, they're not typically a super concept-y, research-y kind of company. They're experimental, but they tend to experiment with things that they want to bring to market and that they have the motivation to bring to market. It's a very practical company with a lot of really great products, and they have some of the best-selling TVs in the U.S. right now because of that. So it's going to be interesting space to watch. I still don't think there's a crazy great use case for why you need these things yet, and nobody has sort of given that great killer app for why you would want this. Right now, it's like we can do it, and so we'd like to see if people can figure out a reason why we'd want it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Samsung's done a great job of showing what can happen when you really put their powerful resources behind creating a great foldable. But still, is it lighting the world on fire? I mean, there's a very specific category of people, of users who are actually fine dropping the money on it. Same's probably going to be said for Rollable. If Apple ever gets into the market, you better believe that's going to create some fire behind it. I think Samsung would wish that they had the same pull as far as that's concerned, but I'm sure they'll try as well. Y'all have done just a really great job. I want to point everybody to cnet.com/CES, which is kind of the hub for all of your CES coverage. And if everybody wants to see, because we've only scratched the surface of what was shown off at the digital version of Consumer Electronics Show, people should go to cnet.com/CES. Jason, Heiner, thank you so much for hopping on with us today. It's always a pleasure getting to talk with you.
A pleasure. Great to see you. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Take care. We will talk to you soon. All right. And up next, we've got some stories of the week. And we'll start with yours. Mikah, what you got?
Yes. So my story of the week, earlier this week, Apple and I think it was CBS together announced an announcement that Apple was going to have that was not related to products, but was something very important that they were going to be doing. And there was some early speculation that it might have something to do with vaccines, that it might have something to do with the coronavirus, this specific coronavirus. But it was something else entirely, and something that, I wanted to celebrate. And so Apple announced a new, what it calls a racial equity and justice initiative, set of projects that it is going to be doing. So Apple said a while back that they were going to be putting $100 million toward racial equity and justice and inequality. And, we didn't necessarily know what exactly that was going to look like in the end. And so this becomes kind of the first announcement of where some of that commitment is going to go, and includes an education hub for historically Black colleges and universities, and what they call the Apple Developer Academy in Detroit. So one of these things is a beautiful building called the Propel Center, and it's going to have some mentorship opportunities. It's going to have internships, and it's going to have curricula that will be helping folks learn to code and that kind of thing. As well as an Apple Developer Academy that is for students in Detroit to learn about coding and other tech education. This is, of course, something that I think is super awesome as a way to help educate folks who would not necessarily get this type of education. And it's good to see, I think companies pledge to donate money and pledge to put money towards different causes. And I believe that they do that, but we often don't see kind of what that actually means and what it turns out to be. And so for this to be so clear, and as, one of its a set of its projects that it's devoting this $100 million toward, I think is very cool. So you can check out this piece or this announcement over on Apple's website to learn more about the Propel Center and the other money that it is putting toward those Apple Developer Academies and things like that, and read about what else it's doing in Detroit and elsewhere. But yeah, again, super excited that Apple is doing this and that we have a very clear understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, a clear starting point. It's multi-pronged. There's so much in here. Like when you read through this, it's just it's very detailed and very planned out. So highly respect what they're doing. You mentioned what other companies have have kind of dedicated themselves to as well. Back in, it was June. June is when a lot of this started to happen because of all of the racial, justice protests, and everything was really coming to a head back in June. Google CEO Sundar Pichai had announced back then $175 million to promote racial equality. Don't really know, as far as I can tell, what that loops into quite yet. Amazon had donated $10 million, which kind of seems out of balance when you think about these companies. $10 million seems kind of small. It's not my money, I suppose, but still, to organizations who are supporting justice and equity. But what Apple is doing, I mean, they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're being very upfront about what's happening there, and I highly respect that. So, good on you, Apple. Yeah. That's great, and that's a lot of money to put towards it too. So, good job. What do I have? Well, I woke up early this morning. To be honest, I woke up about the same time I normally wake up. I just did a show very early. I don't normally do a show at 7 a.m. in the morning in the room right next to my daughter's bedroom where she's still sleeping. But we did that this morning because Samsung did hold its event. Jason Heiner mentioned that they had an event this morning. It was the Unpacked 2021 event. So it was me and Florence Ion doing like live coverage of the event for TWiT. And it was another one of those cases where it was there were no surprises. Literally, we knew everything going into this event. The Galaxy S21, the S21 Plus, and the S21 Ultra, 3 different devices in the S21 lineup. The Ultra being obviously the most premium. But what's cool here, at least commendable, I would say, is that Samsung has like read the room and realized that $1,400 devices is too much. The baseline S21 starts at $800. Last year, the baseline S20 started at $1,000. So a couple of $100 off that starting price point. You do get some step backs as far as the components and the quality of certain build materials. Like the S21 is a polycarbonate backplate instead of glass, which you get on the Plus and the Ultra. So you're making some concessions. I think ultra wideband support is not in the S21, but it is in the Plus and the Ultra. So you probably want to take a look at that if you're thinking or considering about getting a Galaxy S21 device. But the Ultra, it looks cool. $1,199, so right around $1,200, which is still pretty expensive, but a little bit less than what they've been doing with their Ultra series. And Samsung with their Ultra series really kind of leans into the camera system being an upgraded camera system with a whole lot of functionality, which is kind of interesting. It has a 3 times optical zoom and a 10 times optical zoom. So you have different zoom capabilities, and being that they're optical, you're going to get a good quality out of it. And then what else? S Pen support. So we had heard that the Note series was going away, and that the S Pen was coming to the standard S21, the Galaxy S series going forward. You're only going to get that support in the Ultra, and it's an extra cost. So you have to spend $40 to get the S Pen to work with your S21 Ultra, or $70 if you want the S Pen Pro, which has a little bit more functionality. So you've got the ability to mix and match, which again kind of plays into this idea that like maybe now is the wrong time to say spend $1,400 or $1,500 for a crazy expensive, crazy premium device. At least now you have options. You can get the Ultra now and get the S Pen later if you really want to. So yeah, and I mean the devices themselves look nice. I mean, Samsung really creates beautiful hardware, and they are kind of signature pieces when you look at them. You can really tell that they've spent a lot of time and effort honing in the design of the device so that you love what you spent all that money on. And so yeah, I think they look good, and I'm happy that they dropped the price. That was a big one for me.
Yeah. I mean, price drop is, especially in this time, I think is very important. I had talked briefly with you kind of before the show about the event this morning and whether anything stood out or if it was kind of everything that you expected. And I sensed a little bit of disappointment from you. I do wonder if that is the state of things, that with these big tech events, we end up knowing everything ahead of time, and no one ends up being very surprised about what gets announced at these events. And it does kind of take something away from it, you know?
It does. I mean, I don't know if it's the lack of surprise or if it's just the feeling that like smartphones are, we're now like the glass slab smartphone approach, we're now 12 years into this experiment. I use experiment actually in air quotes because it's not at all an experiment, but it's just kind of like is what it is. Sometimes when I look at smartphone, I'm kind of like, okay, well, they're smartphones, and yeah, there's these extra little features that you tack on, but it's next to impossible to generate the same excitement that we could easily generate 5, 6, 7 years ago when a lot of these things were happening for the first time. Now it's very, it just continues to kind of feel very incremental on a year by year basis. And that's not to say that it's bad. It's just very matured at this point. So doing an hour and a half, coverage of a phone announcement sometimes feels a little like overkill. It was like, yeah, we've seen a lot of this. I'm not really that surprised, especially the fact that so much of this leaks in advance. So there literally is no surprise when you hit the event. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little jaded. I've been following smartphones for quite a while, as you have as well. So it really takes a lot for me to go, okay, that's cool, and that's like I'm super excited about that. I have to have that. Samsung does what it does really well. It creates very well-designed, well-built devices that do a whole lot of things. It's just sometimes it's so many things that it's hard to point to one thing and be like, that's the reason. It's just good all around, and that's kind of good enough, I think, for Samsung. So.
Yeah. That's fair. And honestly, maybe the average person is more excited about what they announced today. And it's simply because we're so steeped in it that it is less excitement for us.
It can kind of blur together after a while. But I have the Note 10 and I've got it in a case right now, but it's a beautiful device. Like I love it for shooting video, for video production and recording my reviews. This is what I use to record my reviews, and the footage looks amazing. So it's not like I don't get excited about it, but sometimes the announcements themselves are so surrounded by all these details we already knew and everything. It just becomes more difficult to be like, oh my God, I got to get that phone because I've already known about it for months,
Yeah, that's fair.
So
that's fair.
Anyways, but that's it for this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. We publish the show every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. You can subscribe to audio and video formats. Also, just real quick, twit.tv/survey21 if you want to take the survey. It's totally anonymous, takes about 5 minutes, but it's a way for you to let us know what we're doing right, what you wish we were doing better, if you have ideas. We just really, really appreciate when you do that. So twit.tv/survey21.
And of course, you should follow us on social media. We are at twit.tv on Instagram, at TwitTalk on TikTok, and I am on Twitter. If you want to tweet at me, I am at Mikah Sargent, and I'm at Mikah Sargent on pretty much all of the social media networks, so you can check me out there. Of course, head to twit.tv/STT for Smart Tech Today. I'll be doing that show a little bit later today, or nice. twit.tv/iOS, which I now co-host with my pal Rosemary Orchard, iOS Today with Rosemary Orchard. What about you, Jason?
She's great. Rosemary's awesome. I am at Jason Howell on Twitter, and I'll just plug the news feed, twit.tv/news. If you go there, you can find today's Samsung event, me and Florence Ion talking about it in real time. So if you're all geeked out about Samsung devices, then you can check that out and and check out the announcement as it happens. Big thanks to John Ashley in the studio, also Burke in the studio for helping out behind the scenes and making this happen, because they had to jump through some fiery hoops to make it happen today. So we appreciate you. And thanks to you for watching and listening each and every week. We'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Hey, folks, I'm Ant Pruitt, host of Hands of Photography here on TWiT TV. I know some of you have gotten yourself a brand new camera, or you just had a camera sitting around and can't quite figure out how to get the most out of it. Well, I have a solution. My show, Hands on Photography. So subscribe right now to learn how to get the most out of that camera. I'm going to show you how to make those images pop. I don't care if it's a Canon camera. I don't care if it's a Sony, Nikon, iPhone, Android, even an inexpensive Android device. I got you covered. So head on over to twit.tv/hop and subscribe today.